Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyen Books podcast and live streaming events. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee, and today's guest is Nedra Glover Tawwab. We're very excited to have her here. Before we get into our formal introduction, Banyen Books would like to acknowledge that although we have people joining us from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyen Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Most of Banyen's events and podcasts are free. However, we welcome your donations. So go ahead and put those in the PayPal link below and help keep these free events going. Also, towards the end of our conversation today, we'll take questions from our live audience for Nedra. So go ahead and type those in the chat on YouTube and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Nedra Glover Tawwab is the author of the New York Times bestsellers Drama Free and Set Boundaries, Find Peace. A licensed therapist and sought-after relationship expert, she has practiced relationship therapy for more than 15 years. Tawwab has appeared as an expert on the Red Table Talk, The Breakfast Club, Good Morning America, and CBS This Morning, among many others. Her work has been highlighted in the New York Times, The Guardian, and Vice, and she has appeared on numerous podcasts, including Good Life Project, Sophia with an F, and Therapy for Black Girls. She also hosts her own podcast called You Need to Hear This, and runs a popular Instagram account where she shares practices, tools, and reflections for mental health. Today, Nedra Glover Tawwab is with Banyen Books in conversation about her newest book, Consider This, Reflections for Finding Peace. Consider This is an inspiring book of daily insights based on Nedra's popular #Daily Nuggets Instagram stories that disappear after 24 hours. These are short takes that serve as food for thought, friendly reminders, and perspective shifts to help us stay true to who we are and what matters most. Topics include setting boundaries, rising above drama, expressing ourselves with clarity and integrity, and finding peace and joy every chance we can get. If you'd like to learn more about today's honored guest, you can visit her website, which is nedratawwab.com. Banyen community, join me in a warm welcome for Nedra Glover Tawwab.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, Nedra.
Hi.
Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
You're welcome. Thank you for the wonderful reading of my bio.
So you've been a relationship expert for over 15 years. You've been working with clients. You have this huge following on Instagram, almost 2 million followers. You've written 2 New York Times bestsellers, and I wouldn't be surprised if this book hits the bestseller list as well. It's a wonderful book. Can you tell us a little bit about your origin story of becoming a therapist? What led you into this line of work?
Well, When I started my undergraduate career, I was a little unsure of what I wanted to do. And when it came time to continue in my education, I thought social work would be a wonderful field for a person like me who liked to help people. And I began my journey as a social worker. And I feel like I became a therapist the moment I saw my first client in an internship. It unlocked this thing that I'd already been doing, which was listening. I'd always been the kid who loved to probably ask adults inappropriate questions, who loved to talk to their peers, who love to talk. It's always been my thing. I grew up in a household with dysfunction. I feel like there were moments where people shared with me and sometimes overshared. So I've always taken this sort of listening seat, and to be able to do that as a profession, it was like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this. And now I actually have the tools and the skills to do it. And I could give people actual resources to help them through some of these things. So, becoming a therapist just seemed like the natural alignment for the life I'd already experienced.
It's so great to find your passion and where you belong in the world, isn't it?
It is. When people say things like when you find what you love or you do what you love, you never feel like you're working. And I heard someone remix that a bit and say, when you love what you do, you never stop doing it. And so sometimes I have to remember that I love this so much that I need to not do it as much as I would love to because it does feel like something like, oh, I would do this for free. I love to do this. And it's like, and you need boundaries with doing the thing you love as well.
On the note of boundaries, you're really well known. Your first book, New York Times bestseller, was all about boundaries. Was that
Mhm.
because of your own personal experience? Was that why you chose to focus in on it?
Oh, yeah. I grew up in a family with very porous boundaries, which means that the boundaries were permissive. So, whenever something really big happened, we didn't talk about it, we didn't address it, or if someone did something to you, you couldn't be upset at them. It was like, whatever happens, let's just keep moving with it. And that created some permissiveness in me. And when I was in grad school to become a therapist, I started going to therapy because I was starting to set boundaries and it just felt so uncomfortable. And that's when I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, I have a boundary issue. My issue wasn't that I couldn't set the boundary, but the guilt. Oh my gosh, the guilt would just come over me and I want to take the boundary back. I would always want to say something like, I know I said you couldn't do this thing, but you could go ahead and do it because I don't want you to feel bad. So yeah, I felt so much guilt. And so I really had to work through that. And it's funny because from there, I feel like I just became like this person with rigid boundaries. Like everything was so strict. And I had to find this path to a balance between rigid and permissive, being flexible in my boundaries, being okay with sometimes upsetting people. And I will say it got much better with just practicing it. And then, once I got into the work of being a therapist, I noticed that other people had this issue too. And it comes in the form of work life balance, issues with your partner, issues with speaking up for yourself in a work environment, like all sorts of things. So it's a really interesting um, way to show up in the world because we all show up with some level of boundaries, whether we're allowing people to do things without our permission, or if we're going too hard against them with allowing them to do things, which, both can be problematic.
You mentioned that in your household, boundaries were very porous.
Hmm.
Um, Is that the main reason that in our development that it becomes challenging in adult life to set boundaries, or are there other reasons in our childhood development that might influence us having difficulty saying no or setting boundaries?
Yeah, that's one reason when you go up with examples of people who are not firm in their boundaries, you may not be firm in your boundaries either. It's like contagious almost. But also, when people grow up in homes where there is some level of abuse, be it emotional, physical, or sexual, those are boundary violations. And so you may not know what appropriate boundaries look like, and you may have to figure out like, oh, I actually get to tell people when something is okay or not okay with touch in my body. There are certain situations that might take you out of that ability to have a choice. And so boundaries, learning those as you get older, it can be much harder because you haven't been in a situation where you've been able to have boundaries.
What about people pleasing? This is a term that we hear a lot. And on the surface, I think it can seem like a positive trait, right? We're kind,
Mhm.
accommodating, generous.
Mhm.
Where's the line? When does it become self-destructive?
It becomes self-destructive when we do it too often. I don't know if you ever heard the phrase "all things in moderation." That refers to people pleasing as well. That we can do a little bit too much, and it can be detrimental to our health and to our growth. We live in a world where it is important to please people. Isn't that the reason we wear deodorant? Because we want others to think we smell good. We don't want body odor. We're trying to impress people. So there is some level of people pleasing that we do that's okay in our relationships. But if we're doing it at the expense of ourselves, and we're doing that at the expense of ourselves all the time, it's going to be problematic for us because we're not showing up in our relationships with our needs. We're saying whatever you needs matters more than what I need. And that's just not the case. There are two people in relationship, and both people have needs that should be met.
Yeah. I wanted to refer to one of the passages in the book. It's actually the first one, and
Hmm.
was hoping you might be able to read it. It's on page 3.
Okay. All right. I'm at page 3. When my family travels back to Detroit, my hometown, we host a gathering where we invite lots of local relatives and friends over to see us. This helps preserve my energy. A few years ago at a gathering, my aunt and uncle, who are not married to each other, chatted for over an hour while I observed from across the yard. He seemed to be stuck, unable to get in or change the subject. When he finally got away, he came to say goodbye to me. My assumption was that he was depleted after listening to her complain for so long. Energy is contagious. Sometimes, without knowing it, our energy is zapped by engaging with others. Extroverts and introverts can suffer from energy depletion. It has more to do with your social style than with the person you're engaging with. Focus on how you feel after your conversations with certain people. Are you restored or depleted? Are you anxious or at ease? Did you learn something new about yourself or the other person? Did you feel comfortable with the topic? Were you triggered by something they said? Did you enjoy the conversation? What would you like to do differently if you had to talk to this person again?
I thought this was a great passage to start with. First of all, because it gives our audience a sense of the format of the book. Like, you're presenting all of
Mhm.
these insightful ideas, and you're also giving these reflection questions. Like, there's a lot of application that we can use this book
Mhm.
for in our own
Mhm.
lives. In this situation, I think we all know that feeling of being drained when we speak to certain people and energized when we speak to other people. I was curious if you could clarify what you mean by that statement where you said it has more to do with your social style than with the person you're engaging with.
Mm. Well, as you know, some of us are more introverted and some of us are more extroverted. And when you're an introvert, someone speaking to you about a heavy topic at a party with 20 other people, that might be a little bit too much. Extroverts, they may be recharged by that. Um, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm an omnivert. So, um, if you get me out of the house, I will likely enjoy the social gathering, but I'm going to, say no to lots of things first before I actually get out the house. I'm like, I don't want to go to that. I don't want to go to that. So once I'm out, I'm like, I love it. I love talking to people. I love engaging, but I also like small, intimate environments. I really like having a small friendship circle. I like talking and having deep conversation. Whereas someone who's more extroverted, they may love talking to many, many people. They may talk to people and don't feel drained. They feel very recharged. Although I love talking to people, after I talk to people, I want a lot of time by myself because I just feel like, oh, that was a lot of energy. Listening took a lot out of me. Whereas for other people, they may say, oh, I loved it. So we all have our ways of showing up socially, and we have to be very conscious of that because when we're not, we can be like my uncle and it's just like, oh my gosh, I didn't want to hear that person talk. And it's not that, oh my gosh, you need to just let people know that you don't want to hear them talk. I don't want you to say that, but it could be that we figure out a way to end conversations earlier, that we have some safe words with other people that'll help us get out of conversations, or that we are really charged up before we go into these situations. Because if we're going into them depleted, it's very easy for someone to just drain all of the energy out of us.
I find a good exit strategy is knowing where the cheese plate is and, oh, I'm just going to go grab some more cheese. Yeah.
Or I'm going to grab anything. I'm going to go grab some water. Or, sometimes we have a really hard time telling people in the kindest way possible that we don't want to talk. But I think you saying something like, I'm going to grab a glass of water is saying, I don't want to talk anymore.
Mhm.
We feel like we need to tell the person, I'm tired of talking to you. I must leave. It's like, no, you can have to go to the bathroom. The other day I was talking to a woman and I really did have to go to the bathroom, but she was talking about something and I was like, uh-huh. I said, 1 second, I have to go to the restroom. And I came back and she was like, oh my gosh, I thought you hated my topic. I was like, no, I really had to go to the restroom. But, perhaps she's heard that before where someone used that as an excuse. But that happens. That's a way to get out of a conversation when somebody doesn't want to talk. They're like, I have to go to the bathroom. I need to get water. Where's the cheese plate? There are all sorts of ways to get creative about that interaction. And sometimes it is telling a person like, oh wow, this is a lot of information and thank you so much for sharing it with me. I'm gonna go over here and talk to so and so.
What if I find myself on the other side of that? I'm the one who's receiving that information and having to process, oh, maybe I talk a bit too much or I'm not attuned to the other person.
Mm. That would be beautiful for you to think about. I think people who talk a bit too much and who are not attuned, I don't know if they care as much as you just let on.
Hmm.
I don't think they have that understanding of it. It's like when people are like, oh my gosh, this person is such a jerk. Jerks don't usually think they're jerks, they think everybody else is. So just to have that level of understanding of, oh my gosh, maybe I talk too much, that's a beautiful thing because not a lot of people have that sort of internal compass of reflection. So if you have that, that's good information. Now you know how to cut the conversation short because these are my family members. My aunt does not have that attunement.
Right. You know. Not saying which aunt, but
She doesn't have it. So I think it's one of those situations where you knowing that about a person, because sometimes we don't recognize that people do the same thing with us. We allow them to keep doing it because we hope they'll be different this time. Like, we know this person is long-winded and we'll just let them go, go, go. Like, why were they talking so long? It's like, that's what they do. They talk a lot all the time, which is fine. We have to figure out, okay, in this situation, how do I protect my energy? Because there may be other people I want to engage with. This is too heavy of a conversation for me. I have to be clear about what I'm willing to listen to and for how long.
Just to give people a little background on this book, Nedra, it's taken, you did a year of posting every day your hashtag daily nuggets to your Instagram
Mhm.
stories. So they went away after 24 hours.
Mhm.
Can you tell us what inspired that process? But also, I wanted to know, did you know you were going to do a book, or did that come to you partway through?
That came partway through. I was feeling a little disenchanted with my writing and I wanted to get creative. And I said, maybe I could just get my creative juices flowing by creating a little something every day and just putting it in my stories. I wasn't pleased with the algorithm switch up on Instagram. And I was like, I'm going to use stories. And I started posting. It wasn't even as long as these things. If I go to page 25, I may have wrote something like just a portion of that. Like, page 25 is maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 lines. On Instagram, I might have written like 5. So I would just write kind of like these short bursts of what you have in the book. And I added more to it in the writing process. I added some personal stories in here. I added client references, but in the actual posting on Instagram, it was a little bit shorter because I didn't want to say too much. And it wasn't really well thought out, right? Like, I'm just writing these every day. I'm just, mostly in the morning, I just wake up and I sit and I'm like, here's something I should write. And it might be 2 or 3 lines. And then that turned into, a few paragraphs. So it was a really exciting way for me to get creative and to do it in community, because I was able to see everybody's real time response to what I was writing. Like, oh my gosh, this touched me. And then they share this story of whatever was happening. I would say after about a month into this project, people started to DM me and say, I hope that you have a book where we can get all of these in one place. And I thought, I don't have a book where you can get all of these in one place. And I hadn't even saved all of them. I was like, oh, I need to go back through my history and actually like screenshot all this and type it out. Like, I wasn't creating a book. I was just writing something. So it's lovely that Instagram is able to capture your history and all of these things. But my intention was just to write whatever was on my heart for that day. And once people started to have a response to it, I thought, oh wow, people need to see this.
That's really cool. One of the kind of themes that runs through the book, I noticed, is this idea of not being afraid to take risks in our life and challenge ourselves and see things through. This seems like a really good example of that, where you kind of set this intention for yourself for the year And it must have been there. I imagine, was it challenging on some days to come up with something and you had to kind of delay the process, or what, did it always flow easily?
It did not always flow easily, and the delay of the process was end of day. So by the end of the day, I came up with something. And it is so interesting because my thought process for writing is living. And as you're living, I feel like these words and these ideas sort of come to you. I was telling someone the example of a few weeks ago. I went to Panera Bread with a friend for breakfast, and it was a new location. And when we got there was a guy in line, and he said, I used to I used to come here, but this was a barber college. And I was like, oh, okay. And he started talking about all the things that used to be on the street and all of these things. And my brain went to nothing stays the same. And just that idea is something that I would write a piece of content around. And I would maybe write down all the things that change in our lives, where we live, who we meet, blah, blah, blah. So that's how I sort of come up with ideas for content, for consider this. Like, I just think about my feelings, my beliefs, my ideas about what's happening. It could be from a TV show. It could be from my real life. It could be from a client's life. It could be from a guy in Panera. It's just like I'm open to the inspiration. I'm not
Yeah.
choosing where it comes from. So yeah, sometimes when I wake up and it's much easier to have a burst of information. I know the thing that I posted today on Instagram, I was, working with clients today. I had back to back clients all day, and many of them were talking about the election. And I just, in between clients, I just thought of, today we might need rest, a hug, a long walk. Because I'm talking to clients all day, and so I'm just thinking, like, what am I saying over and over to people? Like, did you rest last night? Did so that's sort of how my brain works when I think of stuff. I don't know. And I know sometimes when I say that to people, sometimes they're like, huh? Like, how did I don't know how my brain went there, but I think in this listicle idea sort of way, and it just turns into content.
Yeah, it's like your mind is trained in the direction to look for the pattern and the underlying theme or wisdom or lesson in life, it seems like.
Yeah, I love the way you said that.
Thanks. You mentioned page 25, and I was actually hoping you might share that one. I had a question for you about it.
Okay, let's
I'll
see.
just remind our live audience that we're going to get to some of your questions for Nedra in a little bit here. So stay on and go ahead and start typing your questions into the comments on YouTube.
Okay, and just to be clear, 25 is about dishonesty, correct?
Right.
Okay. I didn't do it. We might say this even if it's a lie. Lying may protect the way others view us, but it also makes us appear unreliable and untrustworthy. Sometimes, when we do something we can't live with, we may refuse to take responsibility for our actions. This is an attempt to protect our ego. When we can't accept the bad, mean, or destructive ways we harm others, we might protect ourselves by blaming someone else or denying responsibility. Awareness, acceptance, and accountability often push us to be more honest.
Yeah. So I've had a couple of circumstances in the not so distant past where I've been on both sides of a situation where it was difficult for me to either take accountability or for the other. And what we had kind of realized was that shame was a factor. We felt shame around being called out on something, and
Mm,
that was preventing real empathizing and repair from happening. I was just
Mhm.
curious about your take as a therapist on shame and how it impacts these situations.
Without people telling us how terrible we are, I think we can still feel or assume what they might think about us. And I've seen that play out sometimes with young kids where, they maybe haven't been shamed. And it's like, did you just eat that cookie? And it's like, I shouldn't. Like they can tell by the tone. They can tell by the tone, by the look, by the stare. They're able to see, like, I'm supposed to tell a lie here. This is an opportunity for me to be, dishonest. Maybe they want to hear this answer instead of this other thing. So it's it's really interesting how shame comes about. And the best way to undo it is to be honest, to share stories. There is nothing like someone speaking up because it encourages other people to speak up. When we hear more people talk about their breakups, we want to talk about our breakups. When we hear people talk about their childhood dysfunctions, it's like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not alone. So shame really keeps us in this cycle of secrecy and owning a lot of times stuff that's not ours. We will keep secrets for other people because we're ashamed that we were even a part of a situation with others. So in order to release shame, we have to be honest. We have to face whatever the blowback is of being honest. Um, I had an older sibling and I watched like while she lied about things and like the trouble she got into for doing it. And so that created in me a level of honesty with my mother to the point when I actually acknowledged that I did stuff, she was just like, okay, because I think she was shocked that I was honest about it. She's like, did you skip school today? Yes. So like,
Right.
I did not go.
It's disarming, that kind of
it,
honesty.
it was disarming because, my thinking was if she's asking, she knows the truth. Because why would a person ask me if I skipped school? Like, that's such a direct question. I was like, context clue, she knows.
Right. Yeah, right.
Yeah, but I think it made my consequences less severe because I was like, okay, I've been caught. What is my consequence? Like, and it's like, oh, well, if you tell the truth, it's actually not as bad. In that situation, my mother stuck to it. It really wasn't as bad if I was honest. And that just makes me think that when people are honest, how do we receive that? Because sometimes the consequence is so severe that we discourage them from being honest in the future. So if we really want people to be honest, we have to be able to manage that honesty. We have to not be punitive when they're honest. We have to allow them grace and dignity when they're honest about things.
Mhm. I wonder if we can look at page 137. This was a topic I'm very interested in as well.
Okay. 137. Do I have that one marked? Let's see. I don't have that one marked. 137. Maybe I do. Nope, I don't. This is relationships. Is
Yeah.
that 137?
Yeah.
Relationships are a practice ground for honing your communication skills. Sometimes the relationship doesn't need to end. You just need to practice a skill. For example, you may need to practice being upfront, asking for space when needed, and being more open minded. Repairing is a critical component in relationships. If you don't learn to repair, you'll be in a continuous cycle of ending and starting new relationships. Starting over won't resolve poor relationship skills. In new relationships, without the appropriate skills, you will eventually find yourself in familiar territory. This in no way means that you must remain in hurtful relationships. Instead, notice when you're leaving repairable relationships without doing anything to save them.
Yeah. I think we've all probably been there wanting to leave a relationship when it gets hard. And
Mm,
this term repair is one I think, it's pretty well known in relationship advice, but I wanted to kind of unpack it a little bit for those who maybe don't fully understand the term. Can you explain what repair really means and why it's so important in relationships?
mm. Well, repair is confronting and coming to some conditions or agreements about what to do next time. Often in relationships, we may tend to ignore or we assume that the person knows what to do next time because we had an issue this time. In my book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, one of the things I talked about is not just giving people a problem that we have, but also letting them know what the solution is. That is what the boundary is. And when we ignore or we're not clear about what we need or what we want, it's very challenging for people to do anything better than what they've already done. And so the repair is saying, I understand that this situation happened, and in the future, I would like this. Repair is having an open conversation about the thing that is maybe a little too uncomfortable for you to discuss. Repair is also sometimes saying, I'm sorry. So for each situation, I think repair can look a bit different, but leaving open wounds in a relationship, it just creates a lot of scars and a lot of untreated wounds.
Maybe we can build on that and talk a little bit about forgiveness. That's kind of a core theme that you speak and write about.
Mhm,
And you also you've coined a term toxic forgiveness.
mhm.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah, toxic forgiveness is when we forgive people too soon, when we forgive people and they haven't done anything to earn that forgiveness. We forgive people just because we maybe have a belief system that you should just forgive everybody. Or when we forgive people when we're not really over it and we just want to move on. Sometimes we'll just say, okay, I forgive them so you can stay in a relationship with the person. All of those toxic ways in which we forgive, what tends to happen is there continues to be animosity, resentment, and frustration in those relationships because we're actually in a place of unforgiveness and we're sort of pretending to be over something that we're still pretty bothered by. And when that happens, it comes up as passive aggressive behaviors. It comes up sometimes as aggressive behaviors. So I talk a lot about not even having to forgive people. Like it's okay to be upset. It is okay to not rush toward forgiveness. Perhaps you do want to forgive them and it's taken a year versus one day. That's okay. People have to deal with the consequences of, their actions and maybe that's not being forgiven but still being able to be in a relationship with you. So, this idea that forgiveness is the thing that changes us um, is usually not very helpful. There are some times where we need to be really, really mad at people for a period of time. I don't know what that period is, but we can have that feeling and not act on it. We don't have to, leave the relationship sometimes. And sometimes we do need to leave the relationship. So even with forgiveness, it doesn't mean that is reunification because I've forgiven you. I may forgive you and choose to step away from that relationship because that is what's healthiest.
One last reminder, we're going to get to some questions from the audience soon. So I see there's some rolling in. Keep them coming, folks, and we'll get to those in a couple minutes here. Another key theme I wanted to ask you about is expressing our needs, and how we are able to or not able to express them, and also how others respond when we express those needs. In your experience, why is it so difficult for some of us just to even identify what our needs are in a relationship, let alone take that next step and actually be able to express them to someone?
The most difficult part is believing that we can have them. Some of us believe that we are not the central attraction in the relationship. We think it's the other person, when in actuality, it's both of us. We're both important in this relationship. And so we have to develop our voice and be able to center what our needs are. We have to be clear about what our needs are. How do we find out what our needs are? We notice our feelings. When I don't get X, Y, and Z, how do I feel? Maybe I actually want that. When this person does something to me, what are the things that I'm bothered by? Like, noticing how you feel in certain situations with people will reveal to you what the need is. I think about jealousy and envy. Sometimes the things that we envy in people is the exact thing that we want. So if I'm upset because you seem to have a happy family, maybe I want a happy family. How do I start to go after that? So if we can just think about the things that frustrate us, the things that make us resentful, bothered, upset, the things that cause us anxiety, depression, we can get to what our needs are in relationships. I think the harder part is, how do we communicate those things? Because once we become clear, it still is a huge hurdle to be able to actually talk to a person about the needs that we have noticed. But it is a very worthy and important cause for us to be able to talk about the things that we want, because our relationship will not improve unless we have those really difficult conversations. And sometimes we're waiting on this other person to change, and they don't even know that we want them to change. It's like we want some fairy tale movie to just come boop them over the head with a wand and just, I hope they figure out all my needs. And it doesn't work that way. Very often we have to, engage in tough conversations. I know somewhere in this book, I'm not sure which page it is, but somewhere in this book, I mentioned life being short, because it is. And I think we don't think about that. 70 years, even if you live to be 70 years is not enough when you have not lived the life that you wanted to live. And many of us find ourselves in situations where we are not standing up for ourselves. We are not being true to our needs. We are centering other people and their stuff, and we're not thinking about ourselves. And that's just long-term damaging for our mental health. And we have to think more about ourselves and others.
We have some, nice questions coming in here from the audience. Is it okay with you if we tend to a couple of those?
Sure.
There's one from Carmina who's asking, what are your thoughts on people whose boundaries are too strong?
Boundaries that are too strong. So boundaries that are too strong, and set boundaries find peace. I would label those boundaries as rigid boundaries. And when people have rigid boundaries, I want you to think of them as their way of protecting themselves. Think of a porcupine, right? Like a porcupine is prickly because it is like a defense mechanism, it is to keep predators away. And when a person has too strong boundaries, they're typically trying to keep predators away, but also no one is hugging the porcupine. So everybody's staying away. That's not the intent, but that's typically what happens because they haven't figured out when and where to use these strong boundaries. They're using them everywhere. It's like everybody's getting the same strong boundary. I don't even have a boundary, I have walls. I have barriers for entry, and is not needed for people in all situations. So when people have very strong boundaries, there is something in them that says, I cannot trust, I cannot believe, I cannot be hopeful. When that is the case, let's say that, because I've seen these sort of folks. It usually comes across as, the person who likes to do everything on their own. They're very strong. They don't need anyone's help. They're very self-sufficient. They're really independent. They don't need any help with anything. If you have someone in your life like that, sometimes we have to offer to help people when they haven't even asked. We have to be very curious about what their needs might be because they won't tell us. We have to be that consistent person so they could see us showing up and start to believe that people will show up. I know it can be really hard to break down that wall in other people, but when we want to be in relationship with people, it can really break the ice, because what they're saying is, I have some history that has made it hard for me to trust people. And people is you. Even if you're being nice to me, you're still the people. And so if we want them to believe that, hey, you can let your guard down with me, you have to be present as a person that they can let their guard down with.
Yeah, that's a really excellent response, Nedra. I haven't heard it so well articulated before. There's another question here from, this is a great name, O Snap Osei, who says, how do you keep people from constantly trauma dumping on you? I find that since I'm so open / lack boundaries, I become the go-to person, and it's hard being an introvert as well to deal with this.
Well, oh snap, I will say this as a person who has lots of followers on social media and as a therapist, I am I ask very good questions. I seem to be very interested when people talk. I listen, I'm nodding, I'm doing all the things. And sometimes I can really work myself into situations where people overshare. If I am doing all of those things for them to share, I have to be conscious of the things that I need to do for them to not share. Right? Like, oh, I am listening to, I am asking them follow up questions and I don't even want to know. So sometimes, there are certain people that I don't ask questions like, how are you doing? Because I know where that's going to go. They're really going to tell me and I don't want to know. There are certain people where they talk about, maybe how much they hate their job or they hate their partner. I don't ask them about those things because I know they're going to start saying a bunch of information. Now, there are times when maybe there's a stranger who shares too much for us, and it goes back to the first scenario that we talked about, that we have to figure out a way to, I need to go and get a cup of water. We have to come up with some line to get out of those scenarios. But what is oversharing? There are times when you are actually connecting with a person and it's not oversharing. oversharing is so tricky because it's like the other person is really not interested in hearing it. And sometimes you may think that there's a connection there. And so if you're the person noticing, oh, whoa, this was too much, you have to help them wrap it up because they may not notice. They may have saw something in your eye contact and your listening skills and thought this was a safe space to allow you to have this information. And you can let people know that, hey, I'm going through a lot myself, and I hear that you're going through some stuff too. And I don't have the capacity right now to hold that and hold my stuff. Have you, maybe thought about calling another friend to talk to, or, is there somewhere else you could go? I don't want to leave you out there, but I just can't take any more on today.
Does our fear of rejection play into this? Like, I know sometimes the fear of if I say no or set a boundary, or that this person might flip out on me or cast me aside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. There is a fear that people will be upset at you. They will end a relationship. They will say bad things about you. They'll be so mad at you, like all of these really terrible things. And I would say, what is the proof there? Because some of that is anxiety. Anxiety will have us believe that there's going to be some really big response to saying a hard thing or a difficult thing to people. I don't know about you, but in many cases, when we say something to a person, their response is not that big. It's usually like, oh, okay, we can create such a big thing in our head that we think they're going to respond a certain way. Not that they actually do, but we work up all of this story in detail and we assume that they'll have a big reaction, but we haven't actually experienced that with the person. And if we have, we may still need to press forward and have that difficult conversation. So, yeah, fear is a factor. And I think this is an opportunity for you to press through fear and have these conversations with people and not assume that it will go bad. And if it does go bad, let's talk about a plan for that. I know sometimes with my clients and they want to say things to people, we'll go over, okay, how do you say this thing? Okay. And then how do you respond if they have a negative reaction? How do you respond if they have a positive reaction? Because maybe you do need some tips on how to respond if they have a negative reaction, but you still need to say the thing. Say the thing and do whatever you're going to do. If they don't like it or they get mad, that's okay. But not saying the thing, that's not the best option for you. I work with people all the time who have waited 5, 10, 15, 20 years to say something. And then when they say it, it causes such a rupture in the relationship because when they finally say it, they're burnt out. They're tired. They're ready to leave the relationship. They have no hope that this person can change or listen because they've been holding on to it for so long. And it would feel much better if we just said this much sooner to people and give them the opportunity to meet us where we are or not.
I think we have time for one more question. This one's from Renee, who's asking thoughts on social anxiety.
That's a big one. Thoughts on social anxiety. With social anxiety, as with many other anxieties, I think that there's a level of exposure needed to reduce it. And that's one of the harder things with social anxiety because to improve, you have to do. So if you have a fear of snakes, the only way to get over snakes is to be exposed to snakes. The only way to get over social anxiety is to be exposed to social situations. There is this depressuring that sort of happens with exposure. So I'm thinking of a singer that I really like, and she was having a lot of social anxiety, canceled a bunch of tour dates, was saying how she just performance anxiety and then like all these people. And she started working with a therapist who helped her get on stage. Like that's the first step. You can't overcome it if you're not having any concerts. So it's like, okay, get on stage and sit there. Maybe you don't move around a lot. You just stand there with the microphone. Okay, step 2. Okay, we're going to move a little bit with the microphone. Step 3, we're going to do a dance routine. And we're going to, so that there are levels to getting through social anxiety, but all of them would involve being more social. And it doesn't mean being more social. And, like if you go to a meet and greet and it's, 50 people there, maybe you talk to one. It's not, okay, you have to talk to all 50 to be over your social anxiety. It's one. Also with social anxiety, I think we sometimes can get it confused with not being extroverted enough, because there is a lot of praise socially for extroverts and communicating with all these people and being the life of the party. And if there's someone who's just sitting, it's like, oh my gosh, this person is not talking enough. When in actuality, maybe there is some social anxiety, but also I think there's a little bit of comparing yourself to an extrovert. And you cannot have social anxiety and just not want to socialize as much. And that's okay. Maybe you recharge by yourself. Maybe you want to talk to 1 or 2 people in a social situation. I wouldn't necessarily call that anxiety, but I have had some folks sort of confuse the two because they think the opposite of social anxiety is extroversion. And it's like, well, that's not where you need to go. But if you want to go there, you can. Just being around people sometimes is good for your social anxiety. In 2020, when all of this stuff happened with the pandemic, I started seeing all of my clients virtual. And for my clients who have some social anxiety, some depression, I think it's very important that I see them in person. So now I'm saying we need to see each other in person, because if you're a person with social anxiety, you love sitting in the house. You love not being around people because it doesn't push you outside your comfort zone. You never have to face the anxiety. You get to just sit there and have this fake sense of safeness, when in actuality, you have to be in anxiety producing situations to lessen the anxiety. So that's my thoughts on social anxiety, that there is a level of exposure necessary to reduce it. And you don't have to be an extrovert to do better, right? There's levels to being social.
Thank you. We've been speaking to Nedra Glover Tawwab about her latest book, Consider This: Reflections for Finding Peace. It's a really wonderful book, as are her other 2, both New York Times bestsellers. Nedra, I just want to say thank you. It's really been a privilege to speak with you, and I'm really, really stoked that you were able to come and join us today.
Thank you.
I think folks might be wondering, there was one question from Tisha who's wondering, are you accepting new clients virtually? And I don't know if you are or not, but if not, are there other ways people can connect with you and work with you?
Yes, I am not accepting clients at this time, but I do have a class. I also have tons of books and worksheets, and any events that I'm doing, they are all listed on my website at Nedra Tawwab. I will have some group offerings starting at the top of the year. So please watch my social media and go to my website, and you'll be able to find out more.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.